Today I want to talk about Girls of Might and Magic, an anthology from the Diverse Books with Magic group. Cover is fire. Diverse Books with Magic's mission: we are an online community of speculative fiction fans. We aim to highlight #own voices, authors, and stories with diverse characters. Join us on Facebook at Diverse Books with Magic Science Fiction Fantasy Dystopia. And I'll leave a link to their Facebook profile down in the description below if you want to check them out. They have some other anthologies that they're considering putting together, so I'm hoping this will be one of many. Rating an anthology is always kind of a junky thing to do because there's usually something that you love in it and something that you hate. If we average all of the ratings I have, it's like a 3.3 star rating on the anthology. But I really enjoyed it, and if I were going to give like a rating from the heart, probably be closer to like 4.5 stars on the overall anthology, even though the stories in it are kind of mixed. So today I just want to go over each story individually. First in the anthology is Hearburn by E.M. Lacey, and I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. I thought it was a good start for an anthology. What worked for me in this story was the setup for the magic and speculative element, incorporating the pandemic into her story, and weaving this racism, immigration, bigotry throughout the narrative. I thought was done really well and in a way that felt grounded and believable. I was less comfortable with how she incorporated some like standard girl body insecurity into the narrative. It felt real, but it also felt excessive when I thought about it for a teen audience, like sort of petering on whether it was good or bad. Overall narrative is about comically horrible people, and I'm fine with that in the adult characters. Like if you have a teen hero, a lot of times you have to make the adults awful to make the whole story gel, but she also made this one female character who was friends with the other girl an awful, horrible, incredibly malicious, mean, and spiteful person for no reason. I was reading this dialogue the two of them were having, and I was like, but why? Also, while I enjoyed the body horror that happens in this story, I don't think it quite hits the notes that it wants to. I think overall the story would have benefited from maybe like just 100 more words. E.M. Lacey is an urban fantasy dystopian horror writer, and it appears that she has several other stories on Kindle Unlimited for the young adult middle grade genre. Next in the anthology is going to be Wind and Silk by Alice Avina, and this is a 5-star read. As a side note, Alice Avina does have this story out as a separate standalone. I think it's like 99 cents, and it's totally worth the purchase. I really love this. I'd love to support her more in the future. As far as what I liked, the setting, the magic system, there's a misdirect in the action that I thought was really smart and well done, because you're reading about the character and her dilemma. There's an immediate obvious solution that came to my mind, ends up being the solution, but the author did such a good job misdirecting me and getting me to focus on other things. When that obvious solution is what she uses, I was surprised by it. As far as challenges go, there were 2 abrupt moments in the story where I wanted more, or I wanted a smoother transition. Besides that, I just wanted more of the story as a whole. There was an emotional arc in the story that came to a conclusion at the end, but I wanted to know where our character was going from there, what she was going to do with her potential love interest. I had a lot of questions. I really wanted this story to continue. When I went to Alice Avina's Amazon page, I was looking for like a full series on this character or a continuation of her story, and unfortunately I didn't see that. She does have a ton of books available on Kindle Unlimited, and it seems like she focuses on fairy tale retellings. She's published in a lot of other anthologies, so she's very used to this short story format. The double-edged sword to me, entering your work into an anthology, you've got to choose something that will hook a reader and have them going to your page, but you also have to choose something that is enough like the other work you have. I wanted to keep reading, I was hooked, but I just didn't see anything similar enough to this short story for me to be interested in picking another book up. Next was Grace and Ghost by K.R.S. McEntire. This is a 4-star. There's a lot that's unresolved in Grace's story arc, but I really enjoyed her character. She had sass and attitude in just the right proportions, and I liked her immediately and was rooting for her. I would have liked a little bit more from her love interest. I felt like we were trying to give him character and it wasn't quite bubbling into something. I wasn't getting that character pop I wanted from him. So some challenges in the story. There is a gay dead ghost friend named Greg, and I felt like he was really underutilized. I know this is a shorter format, and I know Greg's primary purpose was just to show that Grace could talk to ghosts and that it wasn't scary, but he was more developed than the love interest, and he was developed in a way that was fun and entertaining, and I would have liked more for him, or like for there to have been something for him to have done in this story instead of just existing. And when we get to the part where we are confronting the main villain, I felt like that was all super rushed. Like, we just started doing detective work, we got our first lead, and then it was like boom, 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 everything's wrapped up and it's time to go home. And I just didn't feel like that was very satisfying. That said, at the very end, we do get a little bit of something that I thought was great. I don't want to talk about it in too much detail, but if you want to read something else by KRS McEntire, she is available on Kindle Unlimited, and she seems to write young adult dystopian novels, and the summaries are things that I'd have ate up as a teen. Next is going to be Faith by Suhda Kuraganti, and I gave this 3.5 stars. I liked the anti-leather stance, even though it does look good. I liked that we had a girl who's studious and bookish and trying to be badass but failing. I liked the magic system. It all must have a pattern and a reasoning and a rhyme to it. I didn't like the petty girl fighting that was happening in this story. Our main character has like a girl rival and they haven't got along since high school and they're still fighting about it. That was just gross, and it was really tropey, like that girls can never get along and that they have to compete with each other for everything. I didn't like the shoehorn nepotism in with our character either. Like, she had got the role she was in because her father or her uncle or whoever is the headmaster at this prestigious school, and he kind of like put a word in for her, and that's how she got this position. There was a lot that needed to be unpacked with that. It needed a much longer story to be done well. It kind of made me not like our character, and it's not even really connected to the story we're telling right now. This also was the first short story in this anthology that felt like it was pulled out from a long-running series, and sure enough, when I went to this author's page, I saw that she does have an urban fantasy series that features this character. I hate when authors do this. I 100% understand that you're trying to draw people into your main series, and you think the best way to do that is give them a little taste of what the main series is like, get them invested in that character, in that character's trials, and maybe the kind of adventures that character goes on in a short format, and they'll read the long format. But something that inevitably happens, and this story definitely suffered from it, is there's a bunch of nuance and detail and other inner workings that I'd have understood if I'd read the novel that I'm not getting from this short story. So like the nepotism with the uncle thing, I bet that makes sense in context of the larger story, but I don't get any of that. So it looks to me like she's just being spoiled and in denial. Even this petty girl rivalry that started in their school years, maybe there's an inciting incident where all of this makes sense, but I don't have that context, so I just see it as like a shitty girls fighting each other trope thing. When you craft something specifically as a short story anthology, most of the time you think these elements out and you give the reader more cues. But if you have a whole novel series elsewhere, you forget what you have and haven't told people, you forget what feels like second nature to you is something that's brand new to a whole bunch of these readers. It's just a mess, and I don't think it's good practice. Next is going to be The Outside by C.C. Solomon. I gave this 3.5 stars. I like seeing C.C. Solomon branch out from a magic and apocalypse story to science fiction and apocalypse story. I've read a couple other books by C.C. Solomon before this short story. I recommend her especially for young adult readers. Of all the elements of the story, what works best is its theming. So I liked the human versus robot, program versus feeling themes that were in the story. And I liked the questions like, does it even really matter? When you're like,
well, it's just a robot and it's a program and it doesn't feel things.
I also like that the main character isn't passive or submissive, but at the same time, because she is a teen who's woken up in a situation, she also doesn't really know what to do with her sense of wrongness or her rebellious desires. So it like is a great emotionally confused headspace for a teen character to be in, and I found it really balanced. And the story also captures the isolation and some of the fear that we had from this past recent pandemic, and perhaps are still feeling the whole idea that we don't know who to trust or which narrative is the right one to trust. My main issue with this story is like one conversation could have cleared everything up. The authorities in question were intentionally keeping our protagonist in the dark for no reason that I could figure out or understand even after they explained it. Our character said yes, and I was like,
no, I don't understand. There's still no reason you couldn't have told me all of this more or less from the jump.
and I feel like things would have gone a lot more smoothly for everyone involved. Also, the close of this story has several ethics implications that I don't know how I felt about. I've already said this, but C.C. Solomon has a ton of books available on Kindle Unlimited. They are fantasy, apocalypse, dystopian stories. They're good. I like them. Next is Chasing Waves by Kendra Merritt, and I gave this 5 stars. I found the story was immersive right away, and that Marina and her family could definitely use a prequel or sequel. I would totally read that. I thought there were some good revelations and morals delivered without being too preachy, which is always really nice, especially because Kendra Merritt focuses on middle grade and young adult stories. That's a genre where I would love to promote more moral and ethical conversations without ever being preachy or deciding what was right for the reader. Some challenges: while Marina is an amazing character that's smart, resourceful, and empathetic, this story is essentially a one-act play, and we don't really meet any other characters, which meant that the short story had time to flesh out and really develop Marina. For me, that really worked, and I loved it, but I could see why, like, one character just interacting mostly with herself and the environment might not be everyone's cup of tea. Kendra Merritt writes middle grade fantasy and young adult fantasies. Next is going to be Funnel Cake by Amanda Ross, and I gave this one 2.5 stars. I enjoyed the carnival setting, the traveling circus environment, and for a minute I really liked the relationship between our protagonist and another girl. They had this bonding moment and this kind of friendship that I thought was really sweet. The story as a whole just didn't work for me. It felt really jumbled. The pacing for me was all over the place. There were too many fantasy elements and not enough context, world building, or time to make that all work. I feel like this could have been a really good novel. It was just jam-packed with stuff and it wasn't coming together. Amanda Rose doesn't have anything else on Kindle Unlimited, but she does have an interesting Witch Kind series that I think I'm going to circle back to because overall her writing was good, even though I didn't care for this particular short story. Next is A Meeting in the Woods by Nicole Kurtz, and I gave this 3.5 stars. This story had some 5-star moments that had me smiling, laughing out loud, just being generally excited and enthusiastic. And in a lot of ways for me, this story was closer to a spiritual successor for The Craft than The Craft Legacy that came out in 2020. I found that overall the story was atmospheric and it did a good job blending an urban setting and a woods area. This story has an abusive relationship in it, and I thought it was very tactful in how it sort of was able to establish a honeymoon period, establish a decline, and then establish a point where publicly the abuse is known to the community. And it does even better tackling why the victim might stay in that relationship and feel like she's better off in the relationship than without it, even though there are things that are possessive, abusive, stalking related involved. It's also the first story in the collection to have a non-binary character, and I liked this character a lot. I did have a couple conflicting feelings about the non-binary character being the only character with power in an anthology that's supposed to be about girls of might and magic. Like, what was I supposed to take away from this, having the non-binary character have magic and no one else in the world? Is it because the non-binary character is like sensitive to things other people aren't? Can other people learn magic and it's just that only the non-binary character has managed it? Like, what was I supposed to be understanding here? It really felt to me like there being one non-binary character and one character that had magic, and them being the same person should say something, but I was missing a couple extra steps to get me to whatever that point was. Nicole Kurtz has a variety of books released. Some of them are on Kindle Unlimited and some of them are not, and she seems to focus on the horror fantasy style stories. Next is Outcast by D.L. Howard, and I gave this 2 stars. The writing is excellent, and I'm definitely interested in other works by D.L. Howard. However, I had a huge issue with the father and how he handled his daughter's bullying and suffering. This is another situation where Outcast is a short snippet from a much longer story, and perhaps in the context of the larger story, how her father was acting made sense. But in this short story, where she's obviously being bullied, she would have died without magical intervention. I legitimately didn't understand why the adults allowed this to happen. Not just her father, but other responsible adults, even if they don't like her family and they don't like her. It just didn't make sense to me. And the fact that he just told her to have a stiff upper lip and deal with it, and what goes around comes around, was not okay to me. I was very upset reading this story. I really considered giving this story 1 star, and I didn't because I decided that I was probably a little sensitive to this issue. And the story itself kept saying like they had to attend these events, they had to attend this school, and I was like,
there's got to be some kind of magical contract or something that I don't have the context of because this is a short story.
And I don't know that there is a contract or context that would have ever made this okay, like unless rejecting the contract means auto death. And even then, I feel like more could have been done. At one point in this story, she's in the last week of school, and it's obvious that she's in significant danger. I would just have her stay home sick. Simple, basic stuff like that they could have done, which could have avoided so many issues. And I know it didn't happen that way because stories got a story. There just had to be other ways to tell a good story that didn't involve this level of bullying and negligence, that's all. D.L. Howard has a ton of Kindle books in fantasy and science fiction, and they seem to be geared towards young adults. Well, as I said, she does have a story that continues this series, and I'm not interested in that one at all. But I am interested in the Dystopian Guide to the Galaxy and Dawn of Wolves. Dawn of Wolves has a stunning cover, and I just want to read that so bad. Next is going to be Daughter of Soil and Gold by Megan Rhine. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I felt like there was a unique colonialization allegory, and I thought that it was some heavy material to drop into a fantasy short story, but it worked, and I liked that about it. I liked that our protagonist valued both physical fighting and the power of negotiation and diplomacy, and I liked it even more that she chose diplomacy whenever possible. Some challenges. So this is a novel pitch. This isn't a chapter or even like a novella. It's like the setup to a longer novel, as far as I'm concerned. And it's the kind of information that you would deliver later. Besides that, the story literally hits all the expected trope beats, and I would have liked a little bit more creativity. And unfortunately, while it's well written, it's probably not the kind of story I'll remember in a few months because it is so by the numbers. And it's a shame because there's some good imagery, but I can't even like say that I feel like the characters are unique or special. Like when I think about them, they're all archetypes that are filling out their generic standard role. And it kind of is just disappointing because from the imagery, I know there was creativity there. It just didn't go into the plot or the characters. Megan Rhine has one other young adult story, and it sounds like a portal world similar to Narnia. Next is going to be Pretty Young Things by LaLa Leo, and I DNF'd this story. You know, it was well written, and I think it achieves its goal in having surreal energy, and the writing style is unique and compelling. Even if I felt like it was a very abrupt shift in the anthology, this story doesn't feel like it goes with any of the others. All the others, the kind of storytelling flowed well from one story to the other. They're distinct stories, distinct voices, but they were about a girl character with some kind of power and facing some kind of thing. The general style of writing was similar. This is like really stream of consciousness, flowy, self-referential, and poetic too. It was just so abrupt, it threw me for a loop. LaLa Leo is a poet and a fantasy writer, and she does have other work on Kindle Unlimited. Next is going to be Sight by Tamika Brown. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. The beginning of the story where Narika is trying to save a random popular boy's life was really interesting, but not all of the characters' shorthand worked for me. Narika is a loner and an introvert, and people assume that she's a witch. She needs way more explanation in my world. Like, I was a loner and an introvert, and people assumed I was shy and bookish, but no one ever thought I was a witch because I was quiet. You cannot say someone is shy and introverted and then say everyone thought she was a witch. That requires significantly more explanation. There's also some serious dangling plot threads, and I don't think we pursued the right ones. Like, Narika comes home after helping the popular boy, and it's obvious her mom has something to say about it. I was really wanted to know what her mom was going to say, but instead we go over to the popular boy's house and just leave mom there dangling. And this is an obligated fated mate story, which I was sort of like shoulder shruggy on. They used Twilight as the way to explain the fated mate situation, and then I was kind of icked out about it. I think for me the issue is the first part about Norika trying to figure out how to tell this boy about her dream or try to prevent her dream from happening was interesting and was like mysterious and had a sense of stakes. And this back half where he just like announces that he's a werewolf and they're fated mates and it's leading into another story, just was not interested. The pacing wasn't good, was a lot of exposition. It just didn't captivate me. Tamika Brown is a romance author and she does have other books on Kindle Unlimited, and specifically she has books that continue Norika's story, which is probably where this werewolf hybrid wars junk is going. Next is going to be Serena Dawn by C. I. Rainey, and I gave it 2 stars. Honestly, I didn't like the story and I ended skimming through it. The characters visually sounded cool. My problems with the story was that there was way too much telling. Our protagonist doesn't know what's going on. Apparently she's interacted with these characters before but doesn't remember it, so the characters have these conversations where they basically tell her the whole history of this place, a prophecy. It's just talking back and forth, talking from one character to another, and sometimes the characters retell us the same thing. Oh god, I wanted to pull my hair out. All of that is a major pet peeve for me. And it might have worked in a longer story, but there was like a billion characters too, so I felt like every page we're introducing a new character, and they're all Alice in Wonderland wannabe characters in an Alice in Wonderland wannabe dream world. So like they don't make sense or have rhyme or reason, which makes it very hard for you to hold on to them. I just found this story to be really frustrating, and I'm honestly surprised it made it into the anthology. I know that I said that Pretty Young Things doesn't fit tonally or style-wise into the anthology, but it is like a pretty quality story. It just wasn't something I wanted to read. So I understood why they accepted it and like put it in as like a different thing that qualifies in the anthology. This does not have the right quality or tone or storytelling style to be in this anthology, and I do not think it belongs in here. To be fair though, it looks like C.I. Rainey is a pretty new author. She might also be the author of Dark Fate of the Moon, Dark Awakening, which appears to be an adult paranormal forbidden love romance, but like I couldn't find an author page for her or 100% confirm that she was the same person who wrote this book. The Cursed Gift by Courtney Dean. I gave this one 4 stars. I felt like the opening of this story was better than the close, but I enjoyed it. It had a college kid trying to figure out her place in the world, and she is struggling to deal with this idea that she has this grand predestined fate and it's going to keep her from doing these other things she wants to do in life. And it's also got some like theming of like your family legacy being something that you have to handle and deal with, and how do you live with a family legacy and family expectations. I especially like the discussion because it's very different than like your standard American self-made discussion where you can do anything you want and be anyone you want no matter your history or your context. You know, this girl has a fate and a destiny, and part of it has to do with the family she was born into. And all of that is interesting to see how it comes into play and how you might still find happiness even when there are so many other things out of your control and pushing you one way that might not have been how you wanted to go. You know, the challenge for me was this ending was a little shoulder shruggy, and I didn't always buy how timid our protagonist was in scenarios. Like, I thought she was a little too mousy and a little too quiet and like trying to hide. But I don't know, maybe with a little more development it would have worked. Courtney Dean writes romances and paranormal romance, and it appears all of her work is available on Kindle Unlimited. Next is going to be Memories of Magic by Ashley Ford. I gave this 5 stars and I loved it. I thought it was perfect. I have no challenges. Everything about it works. This is one of the few stories in the anthology where the short story format was a pro instead of a con. We got exactly the right amount, and we got her at exactly the right time and place, the right set of events. I love ghost Ouija board stories and possessions. I was down for it. Everything about this was great. No improvement here. Ford writes romances and urban fantasy. Most of her books are available on Kindle Unlimited, and I want to circle back to her and get something else because this was just so good. If you don't read anything else in this anthology, I think Memories of Magic is one that you should go flip through and pick up. And last in this anthology is going to be Check Yourself by Zachary. I gave this 4 stars. I liked some of the conversations the characters were having. I liked the romance that was going on. I thought this like way of finding yourself and helping other people find their self was interesting and nice. One of the main characters is a vampire, and somehow there wasn't a lot of magic elements in this. But what it was giving me was good and I enjoyed. And I really enjoyed the mundane elements too. Chess is very important in this story and it worked, but it was just an odd pick. Some challenges for this story was that it was a little light on magic, and I found the setup of this college to be weird. It's believable that our character's in like some kind of school that has a really good law school with huge frats that do crazy parties where the influential people hang out. What I didn't find believable about the setup, that at these crazy frat parties, there's a bunch of people playing chess and are really into chess, and all these crazy chess players are also circling these frat bro parties. Like, feels like these two groups should not mix. And if they do mix, it's not going to be at the raging keg party at the frat house. Zachary also has other books on Kindle Unlimited, and I want to look more at them at a future date. So that's going to be my review of every story in this anthology, totally spoiler-free for once. Have you read Girls of Might and Magic? And as always, keep reading. Bye!